Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
I had a friend who was a gardener named George. He once told me that almost immediately after we divorced, some girl started showing up at their house. Then Mike married her. I asked my husband to bring me here. I didn't ask him for anything. He made my house wheelchair accessible. George and I deal in rare flowers. I grow them and he sells them. He made me a greenhouse in one of the rooms, so I have a real job. Betty, I'm sorry. A guy came up to her and knelt down in front of her. I've always loved only you. Alex, I wanted to forget you too, but I couldn't do it. She stroked Alex's hair. I always loved only you, please. I'm sorry too. Alex hugged the girl, lifted her in his arms and put her on the bed, sat next to her in her grandfather's old armchairs. That's how they slept till morning. George, what loads? Asked Alex, bringing the car to the boxes. Alex, let's go here. He shoved his hand on peonies in huge pots. Here are what beauties about to blossom. But how are you doing? Rode up to them in a wheelchair. Betty, I think we've got some top-notch peonies this year. Betty, the man smiled as he looked at her huge belly. Are you going to have a helper soon? Yeah, Ethan's already kicking his feet. He probably wants to pick flowers with me, she laughed. A year ago, George moved to the country. Here he and Betty and Alex had a family business. Until about 10 years ago, he had lost his wife. The children had long since lived their own lives. At 69 years of age, the man was still a good-looking man. And his love of rare plants only prolonged his youth. As it turned out, George was not a bad businessman. He did business with clients. He already had regular customers who appreciated the quality of their plants. This year, for some of the flowers, there was even a line. Even a few people wrote from across the border to Betty, I've got my eye on a very rare garden orchid. I'll show you later, the man said. You should see it. Well, such an unusual flower. If it weren't for her innate modesty, she'd be such a hit by now. George laughed, and I also really liked one interesting sign. George, thank you for everything. The girl wept. If it weren't for you and your love of flowers, I don't know what we would have done. My girl. Everything in life happens in time, said the gardener. Wise words. Have you ever thought about what I'd do without you in my house, my last days? And you gave me a second youth. You guys are my family. I can't imagine my life without you guys. Alex loaded the first flight with plants, and he and George drove to the show. Betty waved happily. That's how Ethan gently stroked her belly. At first I had no one, and now I have a real family. And not only will you have a mommy and daddy, but a grandmother and 2 grandfathers. Dark cherry-colored convertible. It was driving slowly along the highway. The girl sat in front and looked at the driver every now and then with a loving look. She was dressed in a beautiful dress, and on her head she wore a wide straw hat. It was quite hot outside, so the driver opened a bottle of cool mineral water every now and then. The place they were going to was not the only place the newlyweds liked to come to. Not a girl, not a man. They were not particularly interested in art, so the museum didn't appeal to them. But they both liked the unique natural scenery. Mike, let's start today from the mountain, and then we will go to the stone bowl and to the spring, suggested my wife. Well, I am free all day today, the man replied. So we can stay here for the rest of the day. The man reached the village and turned onto the dirt road. There was a parking lot for guests near the lookout. The couple left their car and took the steep path up the hill. The top of the cliff looked like a camel's head. God, how beautiful it is here, the girl exclaimed. Mike, look at this. Betty, how many times I come here, every time I see something new. Her husband encouraged her. Betty sighed with admiration. I love these places. 3 hours later, the husband and wife returned to the observation deck. This place really is incredibly beautiful. There's so much to see that you can't get around in one day. Every season brings something new. That's why the locals felt like guests and hosts at the same time. Betty, aren't you tired? My husband asked thoughtfully. No, not at all, the girl smiled. And besides, it's so rare for us to be alone together that I wouldn't miss it for the world. She came over and kissed Mike. An hour later, the couple were already walking in the national park. It was here that the famous spring was located. There were 3 springs in the protected tract. According to legend, the water from here was healing, so there were always a lot of people here. Betty and Mike picked up a few bottles of water and took them to the car. It was already about 4:00 p.m. when the couple walked the trails of the national park. "How good it is here," sighed the girl. "To me, even the air here is healing." "Yes," thoughtfully said the man. "If I had more free time, we could be here more often." "Mike, I understand," Betty said sadly. "Of course, I'd love to take another boat ride here. Maybe we could do that next time." Mike was a wealthy man. He had a serious company that was a dealer of European car paints. It was not easy for a young guy to reach such a level. The mafia was following people like him. But coolness and flexible mind helped him to win his place under the sun. And for 10 years, he had the status of untouchable. Over time, he gained respect, fame, and big money. The only bad thing was, it all had to be paid for. And Mike gave for it his soft-heartedness, positive attitude to life, and goodwill. As the years went by, he became more and more like the car that was supposed to run flawlessly. He was 45, and 6 months ago, he married for the 3rd time. His new chosen one was the most ordinary girl, Betty, who was 22 at that time. The man disappeared all the time at work, so such family walks the spouses made very rarely. It was almost 8:00 in the evening. When Mike and Betty got home, they changed their clothes and went down to the dining room, where dinner was already laid out for them. It had been so long, but Betty was still not used to the fact that she was living in a huge, luxurious house with lots of servants. She didn't have to do anything, and she should be happy that she was so lucky in life. But inside, she had something grinding inside her all the time. Not to say that the girl was strongly striving to become rich and at any cost. But when it happened by chance, she didn't want to miss her chance. "Thank you, darling," Betty said to her husband tonight. "I'm so happy to be with you." "I'm glad you like it," her husband replied contentedly. "After all, we are a family. We should go out together. Maybe next weekend we can go somewhere else," she asked excitedly. "If you have time, I'm afraid it won't work." Mike slapped his wife on the head. "We have a serious meeting at work. Our general manager is coming from Germany. We need to show him our work." "All right, then we'll go somewhere. When will you be free?" The girl answered. That night, Betty couldn't sleep for a long time. She kept thinking about herself and her husband. After Mike had come into her life, Betty's life had changed dramatically. The girl was an orphan. She had never seen her parents. She was brought up by her grandparents and her grandfather, Frank. About his daughter never spoke. They lived in the village, which is 30 kilometers from the city. Their village life was not particularly different from the life of all other villages. Betty's grandparents kept livestock. They had a cow and a small herd of goats. So the girl's childhood was not hungry. And Betty's grandfather loved Betty. He took care of her. Therefore, in her 5 years, she already knew how to read. At that time, there was no kindergarten in the village. Therefore, the girl grew up in the circle of her family and neighboring children. Betty was not a noisy child, and she was valued for that. She'd sit on the bed, put a basket of toys on the bed. Betty could sit like that all day long. The girl wasn't picky about food either. She ate everything. Her grandmother was the first to die. A few days later, when the granddaughter was 13, Betty's grandfather didn't live to see her come of age for a few days. The next day, Betty woke up late. Her husband had already left for work. The house was a bustle of activity with servants running around. The girl decided that today she would take a walk. She dressed herself in comfortable clothes, took a cab, and drove towards the city. Her heart felt heavy. She wanted to visit her old home. Betty couldn't drive, or rather, after one incident in her life, she never got behind the wheel again. The cab driver chose the shortest route, and the girl in an hour and a half stood near her old house. "Nothing has changed here," Betty whispered, opening the gate with a rusty key. She stepped into the yard, looking around. After Betty got married, the girl wanted to sell the old house at first, but then she gave up that idea. "Things happen in life," she said. "Let it stand then. He does not ask for anything." She went into the vegetable garden. The grass there, of course, was waist-high, but she wanted to go to the back of the house to see if the fence was still there or if the locals had already torn it down. But to her surprise, the slate was still covering the wooden posts. "It's all right," the girl said with a smile. "We'll have to look at the house and the barn." She slowly wandered back, looking at the old trees and bushes. Ripe fruits were hanging on their apple trees. The girl plucked a couple of white apples and took a bite as in her childhood. How delicious, she laughed. The truest taste of childhood. Betty looked around the barn. The door to it was open. It looked like someone had been here before. "But our people can't do without stealing," she sighed. When she saw that half of the barn had already been taken out, the girl picked up a large barn lock and closed the creaking door again. She felt a certain amount of excitement as she approached the house. There was a good chance that someone had already been there too. Betty walked up to the porch and opened the front door. She decided not to close it just yet so she could air out the old house a little. Everything was still in place in the rooms, and frankly, her grandparents had never lived very richly. Not that Grandpa was greedy, but he didn't buy anything extra. So Betty had a very practical view of things from childhood. And that's what her husband didn't like about her. Mike dreamed of turning Cinderella into a princess, but the girl was not particularly attracted to gold jewelry or expensive dresses. At first, she thought she could wean herself off her austerity, but it had been more than 6 months. But the girl couldn't come to it that way. Betty walked around the rooms. In the hall near the window stood her grandfather's old armchair. The girl sat in it and closed her eyes. Carefully, she rocked herself. The rocking chair rose up and began to rock slowly back and forth. "Betty, bring your primer over here." She heard Grandpa Frank's voice. "Now we will read with you." The girl saw how the little girl brought something from the next room, put a small stool next to the chair, and began to read something. "What a clever girl," praised her grandfather, strokes her granddaughter's head. "Now let's learn a poem." Betty opened her eyes sharply and her heart stabbed. There were tears in her eyes. Betty looked carefully out the window. It was as if she saw her grandmother there. "Betty, granddaughter, come here," Grandma Wendy waved. To the child hand, "Grab a basket there in the kitchen." The girl saw herself approaching the grandmother. For the next half hour, the old lady and the girl picked cucumbers, and then carefully put them into 3 liter jars. "I was happy with them," Betty cried. "They meant so much to me." The girl rocked the chair once more and closed her eyes. "Betty, don't be afraid," encouraged the girl, the boy. "You'll just feel the car go once when you step on the gas. That's good. Now try it smooth." Betty pressed the gas hard and the car felt like it was bouncing. The girl opened her eyes. A lump came to her throat. She found it hard to breathe. "I don't want to remember anything else." She got up from the chair and went to her room. Here, as in the rest of the house, nothing had changed. Betty stood for a while longer and, leaving the house, closed the door. "Now my soul is at peace," she sighed and walked toward the local bus stop. Betty didn't really feel like meeting her neighbors, so she asked for a cab to pick her up at the beginning of the village. There was no one there. Back home, the girl had lunch and stayed in her room until evening. Michael knocked on the office of the principal's secretary. "Their requisites have sent me to you to print them out, or just to your address to forward them to me. I'll deal with them myself." Without taking his eyes off some documents, the man replied. Cindy stood for a while, as if she wanted to say something, and left the office. "What an idiot, when you look at me already." She cursed to herself. "But it's okay, we'll see." She smiled some more. Cindy was 28. She had already worked as a secretary at Michael's company for 3 years. Maybe she would have left here by now after the owner married some scrappy 2 years of working for Mike had ended in nothing. With anger, she wrote a letter of resignation. But after an hour, she changed her mind and tore it up. "Cindy, let's have tea." She heard a familiar voice. "Nancy, I can't right now. My boss gave me an assignment. I'll be there in half an hour." "Well, what are you going to do now?" Nancy asked the girl with interest. "It's high time for you to take more active actions. You can see he's a serious man. He's not going to be lured into bed with the usual tricks." "Are you right?" The secretary sighed heavily. "If only that fool hadn't gotten in. He'd be mine by now." "Where did he meet that beggar?" James said he had to go on a business trip one day. That's where he saw her. Gossiping. Nancy, you know, I also met his second wife. You should have seen the firm. She was a real piece of work. She came here a few times. She talked to everybody through her teeth. And then when he caught her in bed with another man at home, that was the end of her carefree life. There were rumors at work that she tried to steal half his property and claimed a share in the company. Maybe that's why he decided to marry a girl from the village this time. Well, look, it's all nonsense. Cindy was angry. For a man like him, you need a woman who looks like a woman with no hair and no jewelry. You saw what she wore last time, tracksuit and sneakers. And nothing that tracksuit cost over $500. I, for one, can't afford that. I was arguing with my friend Nancy. What kind of sneakers did she wear? They're the kind of Adidas you can't get in a regular store. But still, the secretary wouldn't let it go. You've got to present yourself properly. Look at me. Do I ever show up without makeup and jewelry? Yes, I stand in front of the mirror for hours, so that only one corresponds to the other. I'm doing it for him first and foremost. If I were his wife, he'd be the envy of everyone. When I go home, men look around. Cindy, well, maybe he has very different tastes. That's what my friend said, plain and simple. He's seen so much of you in his life that he doesn't care about any of it. Vlad told me a long time ago, I think, that his first wife left him because he had no money. He was single when he started this firm. That's why Michael's already had a lot of experience with women like that. Well, what kind of a friend gets mad at Cindy? She's not being supportive. You're pouring fire on the oil. I wish you'd give me some ideas. How do I win him over? I don't care if I'm his wife or his mistress. As long as I get results. Cindy, but you asked him to take you on a trip. I'll try to think of something and then he'll faint. Then he'll have to take care of you, at least give you some water. Undo a button on your blouse and then he'll take it from there. Listen, this is interesting, Cindy said cheerfully. Nancy, you're a genius. She threw herself on her friend's neck. Now it's all about timing. Mike had a lot to do this week. The foreigner's visit had made him not only nervous, but seriously worried. It was about the conclusion of a major contract for new promising materials. The paint they were offering was no comparison to what they were peddling. Sure, regular paint sold well, but this was the latest development. The German-Dutch concern made a real sensation in the world of automotive paints, but its production was still limited, so the foreign owners are probing the ground. Could it be introduced? Mike realized that, despite the price, it had such buyers. He also had no doubt that after the first shipment on this one, paint would boom. But the Germans and the Dutch were still cautious. It was a multi-billion-dollar contract, so they were going to check everything thoroughly. The working day had long since ended. Only the director and the secretary remained in the office. Michael knocked on the chief's door. Cindy, are you going to sleep in the office tonight? She joked. I'll probably work for another hour. It's hard, he sighed. Then I'll get you some coffee, the girl suggested. You'll give yourself an ulcer. Thanks, Cindy. The principal mumbled good. He finally took off his glasses and got up from his chair. The man walked out into the hallway. The office was deserted. Cindy, why haven't you left yet? Mike wondered. Walking up to the secretary, did something happen? No, she sighed. I had things to do too. It seems to me that with this commission we will soon all sleep here. The main thing is to be well prepared. The chief replied calmly. Then they won't have anything to complain about. And the contract will be ours. Cindy, could you find someone for a few days? We already have a translator. We'll need to tour the factory and the city. Do you have a girl in mind? Don't worry, this is serious. I just have to accompany the guests. Michael, will you take me? Cindy suddenly offered. What about your job? He wondered. Although it did make sense. You're not an outsider. You know the company and the whole kitchen. Let me ask one of the guys to replace you for these days. Sure, the girl agreed. I know so much that with me they will not be lost. Then it's agreed, smiled the director, and taking his coffee, went to his room. That's lucky. Cindy jumped with joy. The main thing for me is not to miss this chance. It's okay, honey. You'll be mine in a little while. It was almost 11 o'clock when Mike's car pulled into the yard. Betty was still up, waiting for her husband. "But how was your day?" she asked him thoughtfully. "Work was fine." "Betty, everything's fine," he said tiredly. "There's just so much paperwork to do, you could go crazy." "It's okay, it's just a little bit left. I'm still hoping for that contract. We could make real money then. And now it's fake." My wife laughed. "The money you make is not real. That's why I love you," kissed Betty Mike, "for your childlike naivete. Is there any other way to look at it?" The girl smiled. "You can look at it differently," replied her husband, with annoyance in his voice. "You can try to take someone else's money and say it's the way it should be." Betty wasn't particularly interested in Mike's ex-wives, but she knew right away that he was talking about them. The girl didn't want to pry into her spouse's soul at all. And most of all, she didn't want him to pry into hers. Betty had met Mike by chance. She traveled from the village to the city and sold pies there in the cold season, and berries in the spring and summer. It didn't bring in much money, but Betty had lived modestly all her life, so she had enough to live on. And even more so after the fact, it was very cold that day. The girl stood outside the market, offering pies to passers-by. It was getting close to Christmas. Despite the fact that people were interested in quite other purchases, Betty's sales were still going. The girl was very cold, decided to stand for another hour and go home. She stood and watched the passers-by. Suddenly, a man walked in front of her. Something fell out of his pocket. The girl quickly picked up the purse. A man. Betty ran after the man. "This is yours." "Where'd you get my wallet?" surprised the stranger. "Did you find it?" The girl told him everything. He looked at her carefully and invited her to the cafe. "You have no idea how you saved me." He thanked Betty. "I know you didn't want to go to the cafe with me, but I want to thank you too." "What do you do?" "I sell pies," the girl answered calmly. "I bake them myself early in the morning. Then I come here to the market and sell them." Mike bought all the pies from the girl that day. An hour later, they said goodbye and she was happy. Went home and forgot about the incident. But probably 2 weeks passed when she saw Mike again. Now they met without any occasion. Betty was surprised. She had refused to go to a restaurant with a man for a very long time, but he had been persistent. "Betty, I haven't met a girl so pure in a long time," he said. "I didn't even hope I'd ever meet such a girl." The girl blushed. She didn't know what to say. Betty didn't quite know what was going on. After LX, she never dreamed that she would meet anyone, but the stranger charmed her, and on their next date, she realized that she liked him. "Betty, we've been dating for a few months now," Mike said one day. "I'm offering you my hand and heart." The girl turned pale. She certainly dreamed of having him by her side, but she didn't think it would happen so quickly. A few more months later, they were married, and Mike took Betty in with him and provided for her in everything. "Mike, I can't do this." The wife complained to her husband. "I want to work, do something." "Betty, have you had enough work?" "Enough." He gave her a stern look. "You're my wife. You'll never need anything." It was very frustrating for the girl in the village. She was always busy. Now she was living like a queen, and she was bored, to tell the truth. Her husband, of course, did not forbid her to go out or travel. Betty was afraid of big cities. If only she could go out with her friends. But unfortunately, the girl never found any friends. She was good with servants. Often, when her husband wasn't home, she helped them. But the workers didn't want to be friends with her. Everyone was afraid it might end badly and they would lose a good place. So Betty was alone in such a huge house. It depressed her very much. Betty hoped that after the Europeans left, her husband would spend more time with her. Betty was in the kitchen when the gardener, George, appeared in the house. He approached the young Mistress Betty. "Come on, I'll show you something," he said mysteriously and went outside. The girl followed him. She was very fond of the garden, thanks to George. Michael had a rich collection of very rare plants. "What is this?" Betty stared in amazement. "Oh my God, it's so beautiful." The girl approached the foam. She touched the huge flower heads with her hands. Then Betty carried one to her nose and could not tear herself away from it for 5 minutes. "This is a very rare peony." Frankly speaking, it is the most expensive variety, smiled the gardener contentedly at the expense of a very unusual bedding color. It is considered a standard of beauty among its congeners. They say that in Holland it blooms all year round, but in our country it blooms only in early summer. It's just unreal beauty. Girl George couldn't believe her eyes. It has such a rich fragrance. It does, replied the man. Look at it. He took a huge flower in both hands. It will probably be about 30-35 centimeters. At home, Betty was growing more and more vegetables for meals and snacks. And practically her entire vegetable garden was overrun with raspberry, strawberry, gooseberry bushes. After the girl got married, the best plants she bought back in early spring and gave away to neighbors. The rest, as she had become convinced, simply overgrew. But at Mike's house, Betty developed an unexpected love of flowers. Maybe she'd gotten her passion for them from George. Or was she conquered by expensive and luxurious varieties? But she looked at flowers differently now. The old gardener quickly realized that he now had an associate, so it was for the love of flowers that they became friends. George, said Betty, tell me, in your experience, are all these expensive varieties easy to grow here? You know, Betty, both yes and no, sighed the man. You know, we can't get year-round blooms, or at least twice a year, because of our climate. But since they bloom once, they have a lot of power. The blooms are big. The fragrance is amazing. He's got a few days to attract lords. That's why he's trying so hard. My girl, but that's not all. I'm going to show you something wonderful. Oh, how much energy he takes from me. I dance like a tambourine in front of it every year. But how it blooms. It's a sight to see. Betty looked at the gardener in surprise. She probably hadn't been in the garden for 2 weeks. And then there was such a global change, and only the girl was able to say in amazement when she saw a glade of blue poppies. My love, George rejoiced like a child. How long I was looking for it. When I found good roots of things, then Michael immediately agreed to buy them. In that sense, I and my host were just lucky. Blue poppy is also called Tibetan poppy because it grows in Tibet and in the Himalayas. I just love it. There are simple varieties and there are like these, so to speak, Terry. The first summer flowers so impressed Betty with their beauty that the girl decided to learn more about them. In the evening, she turned to her husband. Can I do the flowers, please? George showed me our beauty today, and I fell in love with the flowers. I don't mind. Her husband smiled. Just please don't pick them yourself. Do you want to go to an exhibition or order something online with George? Betty was just happy. She fell asleep with that thought. But at night, she had the same dream again. Betty was in the front passenger seat. Alex, let off the pedal gently. You need to learn to feel the speed. That's it, Alex. I'm so scared I looked at the guy with a pitying look. I'll never make it. You're doing fine, encouraged the girl. Alex, you're just getting yourself worked up. Let's have a little more time together, and then you're on your own. A few hours later, Betty was alone in the car. She stepped on the gas smoothly. She tried hard. She had already driven a few kilometers. Suddenly, a man on a bicycle appeared in front of her. Someone was riding towards her. Betty wanted to slow down, but she couldn't. She got more nervous, jerked the throttle in all directions. The car jerked forward. Betty wanted to turn sideways, but she couldn't. Betty woke up to screaming at the top of her voice, no. Betty, what's wrong with you? Her husband asked her. Did you have that dream again? The girl nodded her head. For a few minutes, she came to her senses. Betty, it's been so long already. You need to let it all go. Her husband looked her in the eye. You didn't do it on purpose. It was an accident. Mike, I killed a man. She burst into tears. Do you know how hard it is to live with that? The man hugged his wife and held her tightly to his chest. He realized that it was impossible to forget such a thing. The only thing he wanted then was for Betty to be able to forgive herself, but not working with psychologists, not going to church. The girls weren't helping. It'll all be over soon. Let's take a trip to the holy places, the husband suggested. Maybe the water from some spring will help you? Yeah, maybe some monastery will calm your soul. The next day, Mike left for work very early. It was a few days before the guests arrived. Betty waited impatiently for George to discuss new purchases with him or to make arrangements to go to some exhibition. Betty, this year the flower festival would not be held in August as usual, but at the end of June, so we can go and have a look together. The gardener was pleased. I'll show you later on the phone what beauties you and I can check out. Now I have to water everything. I'll meet you around lunchtime. Time passed very slowly for Betty. Finally, the clock struck 12. The girl eagerly went downstairs and ran to the kitchen. George was drinking tea with pleasure. Now I'll show you such beauty. He smiled and reached for his phone. What is it? The hostess asked in surprise. It's such a beautiful bush, and its flower is unusual, Terry. It's Betty, joyfully replied the gardener. It's my dream, or rather, one of many wishes. George, where can you order it? Asked the girl. I'll show you an insider. The man rejoiced. My God, will our garden be so beautiful now? And I would also like to try a tulip tree. George sighed dreamily. I've heard that some of ours managed to save it for the winter. I wish we could try it. The conversation ended with the owner and the gardener ordering 10 rare plants for the garden. George was as happy as a little child. He had worked for Mike for so many years and knew his second wife very well. She would never have talked to him about flowers. Finally, the day came when the foreign guests arrived at the company. The first day they spent in the office. They checked something, looked at some documents. The secretary Cindy tried to show off as best she could. But to her dismay, the German and 2 Dutchmen didn't pay much attention to her. They are robots, she said angrily to herself. I've been preparing for them all night. And not one of them would even look in my direction. She took a 20-minute break and rushed over to her friend. How did you like them? Her accountant asked her with interest. Did you like any of them? Or maybe we'll marry you off to Europe? Aha. The secretary replied with annoyance. You should have seen their faces. They're all brick-like. I brought tea to them in and out. They don't care. I see you in your famous skirt today, laughed her friend. You at least sew up the slit a little, or it's true. You can see everything under it. And in general, it is shocking in the front. You can say naked nothing you do not understand in fashion. Cindy took offense. I'm wearing it very well. Girl in front of the mirror, you're beautiful, Cindy. Nancy said sadly, seeing the huge contrast in the mirror. You know, if I were a man, I'd certainly fall in love with you. The accountant hissed, pursing her lips to transform her face in some way. God didn't give me that one. If only this fool would realize what happiness has befallen him, said Cindy, adjusting her bust. It's a sin to turn away from such a good thing. A real one. Cindy. The girls heard the chief's voice. Come here, please. But I'm off. Wish you bad luck, sang the one and left the office. By the end of the working day, the secretary was so tired that she could barely keep on her high heels. All day long, she had been looking for something, printing out documents. She was always making green tea, so at 700 m, she could barely smile. Cindy, let's go home. Michael sighed tiredly. The guests have already been taken to the hotel. Oh, honestly, I can hardly stand. The secretary replied and walked on flying legs to the door. Cindy, thank you very much for your work, but the chief has stopped. But could you accompany us? We have something interesting to show the guests. Yes, of course, Cindy barely spoke. We'll do it right. So far, it was hard to tell what was in the minds of the European representatives. They were calm, judicious, and smiling. That was why Michael was even more nervous. We have to be patient and just wait, he said to himself and went to his car. The next day, a delegation of 7 traveled to a local gem. As soon as they drove into the village, joyful voices were heard speaking in German. It was evident that the guests were pleased. Michael had booked them a tour of the most interesting places. The whole delegation was preparing for a tourist trip. Michael called the chief aside. Cindy, you will excuse me, but do you have any pills? The director looked at her perplexed with concern in his eyes. Cindy, are you in pain? He asked quickly. What's wrong? We could go back to the car for a few minutes. The girl barely spoke. Mike ran up to the partners and asked for an interpreter to explain that he and Cindy would catch up with them. The man then took the secretary under his arm and led her to the car. "I'm dizzy," she said. "I must have overworked yesterday. I'll get you something." The chief was rummaging through his medicine cabinet. "Oh my God. But where is it?" "Michael, I think I'm losing consciousness," Cindy said quietly and slid down the seat. "Cindy," the chief was scared. "Can you hear me?" "Oh my God. We have to call an ambulance." He slapped the girl several times in the face, and she opened her eyes. "Please unbutton my blouse. I can't breathe," the secretary asked. Mike was stunned. He could not dare to touch Cindy at first, but then he did and grabbed the button with trembling hands. It took him a long time to undo it. Cindy's perfume and some other unfamiliar scent hit his nose. Her face was so close that the director blushed. After a few minutes, the girl felt better. And about 20 minutes later, they were already trying to catch up with the others. "Cindy, are you sure you will manage?" with concern in your voice, asked the secretary Michael. "Yes, I feel better now," she smiled. "It's just that I feel that yesterday was a very stressful day. That's why my body couldn't cope." The principal was being a real gentleman. He gave the girl his hand every now and then and tried not to let her go far away from him. "Cindy, maybe we should come and rest," he said, out of breath. "I have a feeling we won't catch up with them anyway. They'll be downstairs waiting for us. I'm all right. But if you need rest, let's rest now," taking the chief's hand, she said. The man flinched at first, but didn't pull his hand out. The girl led him to some rock, and they sat down on it. "It is very beautiful here," Cindy said, closing her eyes. "It's even easy to breathe." "I see you are a nature lover," laughed Michael. "You don't have to travel around the world to realize that the sky is blue everywhere." To quote the secretary, "Did you come up with that yourself? Or did one of the greats say it?" He looked at her in amazement. "They are the words of Johann Ghetto." She answered calmly. "I'd recommend you read his election tools. It's very powerful stuff. How often do people run away from their own happiness and then blame someone else for it?" Michael, I never ceased to be amazed. He kept sneaking glances at his secretary the whole way. "I didn't know you could be like this," he said to her when they finally saw familiar faces in the distance. Each person sees in the other only what he wants. The girl smiled enigmatically. Cindy flew home like a madwoman. She wanted to tell her friend everything as soon as possible. "Nancy, thank you," she shouted happily into the phone. "You said everything right on the spot about me fainting and the ghetto because the Germans were coming. You should have seen the way Mike looked at me." "How?" my friend asked curiously. "Did he kiss you today?" "No, we didn't get to that. But he looked at me like I was a goddess," laughed Cindy Nancy. "But where have you been before?" "I've been suffering from unrequited love for 3 years." "God, at least these Germans are good for something," Nancy laughed. "If it weren't for them, he wouldn't have paid so much attention to you." Michael arrived home and collapsed on his bed with exhaustion. He really wanted to sleep, but he got into his phone anyway. He found it quickly. He found the book he wanted, paid for it, and downloaded it to read. If my secretary reads such things, I can't keep up with her. The foreign delegation was happy that day. They all liked the area. 3 more days passed and the work of the European delegation was finished. Everyone gathered indoors. Michael was very worried. First of all, the interpreter was translating. "On behalf of our General Director, Mr. Janssens, we want to thank you for such a good job and your titanic work. Secondly, we have good news for you. We agreed to sign a contract with you, so you become the exclusive and only dealer of our new high-performance paint for all kinds of cars in Russia." Hurrah! Sales managers and logistics specialists rejoiced. "This is our luck." After signing the contract, as usual, there was a small banquet. Europeans sat for half an hour for the sake of respect. We had a little snack and, having shaken hands with everyone, went to the airport. "Cindy, thank you very much." The chief approached the secretary. "How about it? Let's drink champagne to our success." "It's all thanks to you." "No way, Michael." The girl was embarrassed. "It's my job. I know that you have done much more." The director looked at Cindy carefully. "If I can compensate you for everything you've done for me with a bonus, then let me give you one this month. I can do without it." The secretary looked at him in astonishment. But if it makes you feel better, I will accept it from you." "Yes, I'll be very happy about that." The man smiled. "Thank you for the book. I've already started reading it." Cindy really wanted to jump on his neck, but she was well aware that the time was not yet right. She had to wait until her fish was fully in her net. "Nancy, can you believe he wants to give me a bonus this month? He's also started reading this book. Look, at least give me a synopsis. Or what if he asks me something about it?" The girl laughed. "And I'll be standing, running. Is he putting you in jail?" "In shock," said the friend. "Is it really true?" "Wow. I'm afraid to believe it myself," Cindy said excitedly. "God, I wish I hadn't spooked him. I'm thinking about every word right now." "Come on, hang in there," Nancy encouraged her friend. "Come on, let's go. We've been here for half an hour." Almost everyone had been traveling so much in the last week that good food and alcohol had done everyone good. It was almost 10 o'clock when everyone went home. Cindy pretended to forget something. "You haven't left yet?" Her boss asked her in surprise. "I thought I just looked. No one was here. But I celebrated our success so much that I forgot my wallet in the desk." The girl laughed. "Well, let me take you home," the director suggested. "Oh, Michael, you are already tired," she replied. "I can walk home." "Cindy, come on." The chief protested. "It doesn't cost me anything. Come and sit down." The girl pretended to be very embarrassed, but nevertheless got into the car. They laughed all the way. Mike's champagne loosened his tongue. It was obvious that he was pleased to be in the company of his secretary. "I can remember their faces," Cindy laughed. "What's on their minds? You never know. It's always the same expression on their faces." "Yeah, I was pretty nervous at first, too." The man backed Cindy up. "I kept thinking they were angry about something, but they were just smiling. Then I gave up on the whole thing and decided to let it go. And it did." He looked into the girl's eyes intently. "I think they really liked it," Cindy suggested. "Maybe the memory of their homeland helped them. The German was really excited about our place." "Yes, that was a good idea," Michael smiled. "Cindy, did you really manage to be happy?" she asked herself. "I think he's in love with me." Meanwhile, Mike waited a little longer and started his car. "I must be crazy," he said to himself. "But this madness is so appealing, it makes me happy. I'm crazy about her." He started his car and smiling all the way back home after midnight. Betty was already asleep. She didn't wait for him tonight. "Well, that's good," the husband thought. "All my thoughts are all jumbled up today. I need some time to recover." Finally, the weekend came. Betty waited impatiently for her husband to be free at work. The next day, she got up early, but Mike slept until lunchtime due to fatigue. Drank yesterday's champagne, Mike cheerfully pronounced his wife. "You're already up. Let's have lunch together. You can tell me what happened at work." "Betty, hello. My husband tried to smile at me. Just a strong tea and something for the headache. I think I had a little too much to drink last night. Can you congratulate me? We've managed to sign a contract." "Congratulations." His wife kissed him. "How happy am I for you?" "Then this calls for a celebration." "Oh no, not now," the husband protested. "I've got a headache from last night." "Well, let's drink tea and go to bed," smiled Betty. "Rest all day today." Mike slept all day. Finally, he was able to get up and go down to the kitchen. Betty was cooking something. It was Saturday, and the missus had let the servants off early. She wanted to do a little housework herself, and she was more than happy to do it. "How good does it smell?" Mike sighed at the aromas. "We're going to celebrate our success tonight." "I felt like cooking something for you, didn't I?" The wife smiled. "Mike, I love you so much." "I love you too." The man kissed his wife. "I'll throw you a celebratory dinner. But I'm not drinking anymore. I'll have to sleep off my hangover for a week." "I don't mind at all." The girl laughed. "You know I'm not in a measure either. And you and I have juice for toast." Mike and Betty ate and hotly discussed the latest news. "Oh boy." The wife rejoiced. "You've done such a hard job, haven't you? It's a real success." "I still can't believe it myself," laughed the man. "If you only knew how I was worried all this time." "How are you doing?" "We've been talking about my business all evening." "What did we order those amazing flowers for?" Betty's eyes were burning. He and I want to go to the flower festival, if it's okay with you. Betty, really? Her husband hugged his wife. I'll even drive you there myself. I won't have so much work now, so we'll get some rest. Do you really want to come with us? Mike's girlfriend was happy. I'd be so glad. But I have to give time to my wife, the man replied and kissed her. The weekend flew by quickly, and I had to go to work again, probably a week or two. Mike planned to work hard on the new project, and then start giving everyone time off and vacations. He arrived at the office early, and no one was there yet. About 20 minutes later, someone came in. Michael, he heard Cindy's voice. Good morning. The girl opened the door and entered the chief's office. It was as if the director had been doused with boiling water. He became very nervous. The presence of the secretary worried him. Hello, Cindy. He tried to smile. How was your vacation? Honestly, slept for almost 2 days, she laughed. I thought I wouldn't even get up today. Yes, I too, you could say, as soon as I fell on the bed. So only on Monday morning and woke up. But nothing, it will pass quickly, smiled the girl. The main thing we all worked out. What can I get you, tea or coffee? Yes, I embarrassed the director. Let's have green tea. This I learned from our partners. He laughed. Thank you, Cindy. The chief stared at the girl. He couldn't take his eyes off her. He was doing his best to keep his cool, but he was very bad at it. Cindy, let's celebrate our success at the cafe tonight. Unexpectedly, he said. A friendly get-together. Michael, I don't mind, replied the secretary. We have to support our success in some way. She laughed. All day long, the director was on pins and needles. On the one hand, he was looking forward to the evening date with Cindy, but on the other hand, he was gnawing at his conscience. What was all this for? Shouted a voice in his head. You want to show her gratitude. Just say it. You just got married. Betty is a wonderful girl. Mike sat down tiredly in his chair, took off his glasses, and looked carefully out the window. Are you stupid? Shouted someone in his head. Look at how amazing she is. You couldn't find a girl like Cindy on the road. What a shape she's got, and she's well read. She's the kind of girl you can't go wrong with. This is going to be interesting. There were voices all day, and Mike had already decided not to go to the restaurant. But when Cindy visited him again in the evening, he resolutely said yes. And after waiting until everyone had left work, they went to an expensive restaurant. Cindy, honestly, you struck me as so well-read, the man said, looking at her with a penetrating gaze. What else do you like from the classics? I blushed, girl. You know, I read everything and try to apply in my life. So I have all the books' favorite, even if we go back to Goethe. I don't agree with these main characters, but if each of them had made their choice, why did they have to keep playing? After all, it didn't make any sense. I completely agree with you, the chief supported her. If love is past, why keep a dead relationship? After all, everyone could live happily ever after a divorce. Michael enjoyed talking to Cindy. He even forgot for a while that he was married. The evening was going splendidly. It was about 10 o'clock when the chief's car stopped in front of the secretary's driveway. Cindy didn't dare, the man pronounced as the car stopped. Thank you for tonight. I had a very good time with you. Her heart, the girl pounded frantically. She pretended to get out, but she did so slowly that Mike grabbed her and kissed her passionately. Cindy, the headmaster, finally looked at her. We could have a cup of coffee each. The girl kept her eyes on him. She nodded happily and took his hand and led him to her apartment. Mike came home very late. His wife had been asleep for a long time. The man smelled like a woman's perfume. But he was insanely happy. This woman was pounding in his temples, and with such a woman you can live the rest of your life. The next day, Mike was asleep at about 9 o'clock in the morning when Betty finally managed to wake him up. God, all this business ever catches up with me. He cursed and quickly got dressed and ran out of the house. The man was just rushing to work. Now he had another interest. He was going not just to work, but to meet the woman he loved. Cindy was already waiting for him. She went into his office and closed the door behind her. Mike jumped on her and started kissing her passionately. Cindy, I adore you. He gazed intently into her eyes. How good are you today? I'll be waiting for you after work today. She whispered and wanted to leave the chief's office. But he caught her and embraced her. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. "Come in." The director quickly sat down in his chair. "So Cindy, please do it by tomorrow." Cindy nodded in agreement and went to her room. The girl was doing quite well in her role, so no one in the office had guessed anything yet. Nancy ran in at lunchtime to see her friend. "Nancy, I'm so happy I had him yesterday." "Who's surprised?" she asked. "Mike, he came to your house. I finally got him." The girl's eyes glistened with happiness. "Nancy, he's mine. We're having a real affair. Come on, are you guys serious?" Her friend opened her mouth in amazement. "He's already kissed you, and I'm not the only one who's all over him." The secretary laughed. "Last night we had a passionate night of love. You have no idea how happy I am." Cindy can't be. Nancy couldn't come to her senses. "Are you too serious?" "What about his wife?" "Well, I'll work on that later. The main thing is that he doesn't break away from me," the girl replied. "Trust me, after a while he won't need a wife anymore." Betty hoped that after the contract was signed, Mike would spend more time with her. But with the contract came new problems, so her husband at work was disappearing all the time again. She used to see him at least in the evenings, but now she could only see him on weekends, and he usually went to work on Saturday too. There was going to be a flower festival next week, and Betty wanted to talk to her husband about it. "Mike, what are you doing next Saturday?" "Saturday." Concerned, the husband asked his wife. "Okay, I'll try. Let's talk about it later." "All right, then let's wait until Friday." Betty agreed. "Mike, thank you. I love you so much." Another week went by and Mike realized he was crazy about his secretary. "Cindy, I love you so much," he said to the girl. "You're all I got. What about your wife?" Cindy asked cautiously. "Don't you love her anymore?" "Why bring her up now?" The man kissed his mistress. "The main thing is that I love you." "I love you very much too," but the secretary looked the chief in the eyes. "Well, my dear?" He was surprised. "Are you embarrassed? Or do you lack my attention?" "Mike, I'm all yours without a trace," Cindy said seriously. "Then why should I share you with anyone else?" "Cindy, I understand you," sighed the man. "I can't do without you. Please bear with me for a while. I'll settle the matter with my wife. I can't do anything about it now." "Okay, my love, I'll be waiting for you," kissed Mike passionately. Friday came and Betty finally waited for her husband. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning when he came home. "Hello, my love," she hugged the man. "You can't work so hard." She looked at him worriedly. "It's all right," Betty tiredly replied Mike. "Just a little more and I'll have more time." "Mike, can we go tomorrow?" asked his wife. "I would so like to spend the day with you." "Betty, you and George go together," suggested the husband. "Take a cab there and back and walk around the park, as long as you like." "Yes, George is ill," the girl said with annoyance in her voice. "He barely called me today. He drank some milk from the fridge the other day. He got a sore throat." Mike exhaled. "All right, then let me take you tomorrow. We can spend some time together." Betty kissed him happily. She wanted to go to the flower festival, but she didn't dare to go alone. "Thank you, sweetheart," like a child. She was happy. "It means so much to me." The next day at 10 o'clock, Betty and Mike left home. An hour and a half later, they were at the show. And in about 40 minutes, the garden appeared in front of them. All the parking lots were already taken. Mike finally managed to find a suitable spot, and he and his wife went to see the expositions. People in colorful costumes were walking around. God, it was beautiful. "Betty, Mike, just look at this exposition. What amazing roses are here." The man wasn't really attracted to flowers. His thoughts were with Cindy. He promised her he'd be there. That's why Mike was so nervous. It was obvious that his wife wanted to stay until the end of the party, and he didn't know how to explain to her that they would have to leave early. It was about 3 o'clock when Mike's phone rang. Was at work. He said excitedly to his wife and stepped aside. "Cindy, hi," the man said cheerfully. "I, as promised, will be loved. And I ask you to come immediately." Mikey's weak voice was heard. "I don't know what happened, but I can't even get out of bed." Cindy could barely speak. "Please come over. Maybe call an ambulance." The chief was worried. "I'll call them right now." "Mike, I can't even get to the door to open it for them," Cindy said quietly. "You got a key, haven't you?" "Cindy, love. Hold on. I'll be there in an hour." Mike promised and turned off his phone. He quickly ran to his wife and told her that they had to leave immediately. "Betty, there's been an emergency at work," he said as they ran to the car. "One of the employees had been electrocuted. He's unconscious right now. Let's hurry, let's go home." The girl was shocked and quickly jumped on the front seat. "Cindy, my love," Mike said to himself, "I'll be home soon. Be patient." They pulled onto the highway and the man drove at full speed. He looked at his watch. At this rate, they should be back in about 40 to 50 minutes. Mike put on more gas. There was a small turn ahead. The man didn't even think about it. His hand pressed the gas more and more. Suddenly, the car seemed to break away and fly up into the sky. Betty saw that they flew somewhere to the side. A few moments later, there was a strong impact and the girl lost consciousness. A few days passed after the crash and Betty finally opened her eyes. She felt like there wasn't a single spot on her body that didn't hurt. She was forcing it. Someone saw that she had regained consciousness and called the doctor. Well, that's good. She heard Betty above her head. Now she would definitely live. Another week passed, and the girl began to feel better. That afternoon, her husband arrived. "Betty, I'm sorry." He burst into tears. "It was all my fault. I wasn't in control of the traffic at all because I was speeding." As it turned out, Betty's husband, to everyone's surprise, was not injured at all. The doctors were still in shock. They literally pulled the girl from the dead. She had a severe concussion. She fractured her right arm in 3 places and her spine was completely shattered. "Unfortunately, she will not walk," said Mike, the head doctor. "Her spine is severely damaged. I'm very sorry. I have money. I am ready to take her abroad," sobbed the man. "It's all my fault. You won't get any help there either." The doctor replied with annoyance in his voice. "The doctors there are just like us, believe me. They can't perform a miracle." After that day, Mike lost his head. Moreover, the police proved that the cyclist himself turned sharply from the curb to the road. He was found guilty. The girl shook her head negatively. She grabbed a pen and a notebook and started to write something. "Alex, I love you very much, but I want to be responsible for my own actions." She showed her note. Alex realized that what happened was his fault. That's why he made the decision that Betty should stay free. Yeah, plus he loved her too much to put her through such a horrible ordeal. At the trial, Alex got 3 years. "Alex, I'll be waiting for you." The girl wrote, "I love you very much." "Thank you, Betty. I'll write to you." He kissed the girl. "And when you get your voice back, we'll talk on the phone." Betty wrote letters to Alex almost every day. He answered them often too. The girl suffered a lot. Alex was not only her best friend, but also her favorite person. They had been dating since they were 18 years old and were going to get married in a year. At that time, the girl was 20 and the guy was 22. Betty lived in hope that she would be able to forgive herself. And when Alex came back, they would finally have a family. But one day, she received a strange letter from Alex. "Betty, please forgive me, but it's over between us," the guy wrote. "I don't love you anymore. This is where I met someone I love. Her name is Molly. She's our nurse. We're happy together." The girl didn't know how she survived it. Betty seemed to die that day. She stopped eating and wanted to get on with her life, but she couldn't. "I guess God wants me to live." The girl cried. "But why should I live if I've lost everything? Alex left me." After this incident, the girl did not write to Alex anymore, and no more letters came from him. A year later, Betty gradually regained her voice and began to live a normal life. And then Mike came into her life. The girl realized that in such a state she would be a burden to her husband. Betty didn't realize what would happen between them now. Betty's husband came into her room one day. "I think about you all the time and I want to do something to help you, but I don't know what to do. How do you feel here? Maybe you'd like to live somewhere else for a while?" Mike began gently. Betty jumped up sharply. It was as if a dark cloud had come into her heart. "Do you want me to leave here?" she asked bluntly. "You don't like my presence?" "Not at all. But her husband tried to find the right words. Maybe somewhere closer to nature, you feel better. Mike, I understand. The girl answered calmly. You have to get on with your life, too, don't you? You deserve to be happy. Thank you for understanding me. The husband sighed with relief. I'm still young. Betty looked at him carefully. She realized, of course, that such a thing could happen. But the girl hadn't expected it to happen so quickly. All right, I won't stop you. You can file for divorce. Dryly, she replied. I'll go back to my village. That's good. Betty, thank you. Mike smiled cynically. Don't worry, I'll leave you some money. You won't need anything. Mike, I don't want anything from you. His wife looked at him. The only thing I want you to do is let me take some flowers. You can have them all. He laughed happily. George will help you with that. A week later, the girl said goodbye to all the servants, all talking to her through tears. Betty girl, George hugged her. I'm coming to visit you. I've got an idea. How can I live on your pension? You and I will organize a little work. He winked at Betty. Mike put the girl in his car, loaded her things, and drove to the village. Not so long ago, he had taken me away from there, she thought, and now he was bringing me back. She didn't try to hide it, but she was very hurt by her husband's behavior. But the girl realized that if he was already thinking about his personal life a few months after the accident, what kind of family could there be about? She knew that sooner or later he would still leave her. So the girl decided that it would be better to let it happen now. Look, I prepared everything for your arrival here, bragged her ex-husband. Here for you now, all the conditions. The room has a toilet and a shower on the porch, special lift for the stroller arranged. You only go to your vegetable garden. Look, guys, you've got 2 paved paths. All the grass has been pumped out. Mike, thanks for everything. Kind to smile at Betty. I really appreciate it. Well, what then? Come on, said Mike. After getting all the stuff into the house. If you need any help, call me. I hope we part with no hard feelings. No hard feelings, replied Betty quietly. May everything go well in your life. Good luck. Mike quickly ran to his car and drove off. The girl sobbed. Is it really that easy to just leave someone? She whispered. I'm like some kind of dog. Doesn't he have a heartache for me? The heartache came out with the tears, and the girl didn't want to interfere with that process. Finally, Betty calmed down. She had a new life to start. She drove slowly to the house without labor, drove onto the porch, and began to sort out her things. It had been almost 2 months since Betty had lived in her old house. Alone in a wheelchair was very difficult, but the girl tried not to lose heart. After her ex-husband brought her home, Mike never called again. At first, the girl was very hurt, but then she accepted it all. Betty told George the last time he came over. I got some bad news. Mike married some Cindy. They say she was his secretary for years, for Christ's sake. A real mayor swore. The man's going around acting like a hostess. The guy said they'd take a few more looks. And then, if this treatment continues, they'll start to leave. I'm thinking about it myself. We took the most valuable thing from Mike, laughed the gardener. Now we'll start breeding ourselves. You have a light hand. I'll help you with the planting. Betty, I already have 2 buyers. So don't worry, daughter, you and I are gonna have a nice life together. I want you to realize at once who is the owner of this place. A stocky man with a big scar on his cheek looked at the guy with hatred. I think you realize what happens for disobedience. I obey only God. Alex challenged him. You want to hit? Hit him. You'll have to answer for it. From the first days of his imprisonment, Alex decided that he would not fall for any provocations. He would do everything to be released early for good behavior. But since he from the first day did not obey the local authority, Gilbert, his life turned into hell. Alex was beaten many times. All his things were taken away. But the guy did not give up his position. Then Gilbert ordered Alex to slit his wrists. The guys just miraculously saved him. But after that, a commission appeared in the prison, and Gilbert was pinned against the wall. He was given a choice. Either he stays in this prison and never messes with anyone else, or he would be transferred to a place where he would probably not live. The authority figure calmed down for a while. But the man didn't know how to lose. So he decided to go the other way. But now let's read what she wrote to him. Gilbert was laughing his ass off. My beloved, there was a loud laughter, and I'm looking forward to seeing you. I can't wait for you to come home. Come here, let's practice a little and write. A thin man quickly ran up to the authority figure. He looked closely at the handwriting and wrote something with his own hand. What a talent you have. Gilbert praised him. Now write, Dear Betty. I'm sorry, but it's over between us. I don't love you anymore. I've met the woman of my life, laughed the authority figure. I'm going to give you a treat. Half an hour later, while he was licking the envelope, he sealed it. The address was written on it in the same handwriting. So now you take it to him, Gilbert ordered, and keep a close watch on his correspondence so that he will not receive another letter from her. I'll arrange to have her letter stamped. He won't pay any attention to her anyway. What's next? We're having fun. And now a letter from her, Dear Alex. It's very hard for me to write this, but it's over between us. I beg you to understand. I don't know when you'll be back, and I have my own life to organize. I'm sorry, I'm getting married. Don't write to me again. The whole company was having fun with the work they'd done. And as it turned out, for good reason. Betty, why did you cry so much at night, Alex? Because I love you. I'm not going to end my life just because I want to look in your eyes. One day I'll come back and you'll answer for everything. The guy did his best and earned amnesty for his work. About a year ago, an acquaintance wrote him a letter that Betty had married a millionaire, and the pain moved to him, kept the guy from living all this time, and all his dreams were only about tracking Betty down and asking her the most important questions. I took the blame for you, Betty, and you betrayed me. He rehearsed their conversation in his head. The big gate closed behind Alex, and the barbed walls were left behind. The boy looked around one last time and walked forward with a confident gait. Alex was from the city himself. He lived there with his parents for many years. But after Betty turned 20, he moved to her village. The guy had a car, and he went to the city every day, where he had a job. The young people wanted to build a new house after the wedding so that their children could start their story, so to speak, with a clean slate. Usually in the morning, when Alex was on his way to work, he drove Betty to the market too. Even then, the girl was already selling her berries and fruits, and in winter she brought pies. Alex came home. His parents welcomed him with joy. Alex, son, I feel so sorry for you. Your mother cried for nothing. You did time for her, and she left you. God, how can you do that? Mom, I want to look into her eyes. Let her answer me for this, calmly answered the son. God with her read the father. Why do you need her? There are so many good girls. You will definitely find your happiness. Dad, but I don't want anything from her. The kid argued. I just need her to give me an answer. For what? Alexa's parents realized that the son will still do everything in his own way, so they did not interfere with him anymore. He decided to go the same day. Alex wanted to find out Betty's new address from someone. It was completely dark when the guy approached the house of his acquaintances. He knocked on the gate. Someone recognized him and let him in. It was an elderly couple he had been friends with when they lived together with Betty. It had been a few months since Mike had married Cindy. He had formally proposed to her in December. And just before Christmas, they signed their marriage license. For the first month, the man's happiness just flew. He'd never felt so good. Cindy didn't work anymore. She took care of the house. Well, she wasn't really interested in the house. She enjoyed being in charge of it. Very quickly, the girl felt like a mistress and began to insult the servants. At first, she lashed out at the old gardener because he wouldn't let a single bad word about Betty be said. Cindy simply hated him. She followed him around for almost a month until she finally thought of something to kick him out for. I've heard how you've been unauthorized to dig up rare flowers from the garden. She came up to George one day. Who gave you permission? First of all, it was back in Betty's day. The man answered calmly. And secondly, the owner himself authorized it. Are you lying? I saw that there were fresh shovel marks. Cindy shouted at him. I'll tell my husband all about it. You have no idea how happy everyone here was when Betty was mistress of the house. The gardener couldn't take it anymore. What did you say? In a rage, yelled the new landlady. Get out of here and don't ever set foot in his house again. That evening, when Mike came home from work, Cindy told him all about it. "You kicked George out in shock." He looked at the girl. "Yeah, he'd worked here for years. He couldn't have stolen anything." "Don't you believe me?" the wife said unhappily. "I saw with my own eyes how he took something out of the garden in a bag." Mike was sorry to lose such a man, but he said nothing to Cindy. But a few days later, his favorite cook disappeared too. He stood up for Betty too. So what's this all about? Is the husband angry? Why are my people leaving? They've worked for me for so many years. "Mike, you have to make a change sometime." The girl replied calmly, "The time here is up. We're going to have new people working here now. And you can trust me that I will definitely choose the best for us." Mike began to notice that his new wife quickly got into the role. There was a certain aggressiveness about her. Instead of a fluffy cat, Cindy sometimes turned into a real lion. "Oh, Cindy, I see you've gone completely overboard," Nancy said to her friend on the phone. "You know, it's so messed up here," she replied tiredly. "After that Popper and Betty, the house is a mess. I wish he'd thank me." "He doesn't say anything against you," Nancy wondered. "He's probably not used to your ways after all." "Let him say a word," laughed Cindy. "He's sitting under my heel, and they bring me slippers in his teeth." "That's what you trained him," marveled accountant. "And you also with him does not overreact. I know him better than you." Mike can tolerate for a long time, but if he decides that he no longer needs a man, immediately you nothing last will no longer save. "Do you doubt me?" Cindy laughed. "You can be sure he's on my mind. Let him dare to cross me." 2 months after the wedding, Mike clearly realized that he had made the biggest mistake of his life. "I not only made Betty an invalid because of her, but also left her in trouble," the man fought back. "God, how could I have been so blind? What happened to me?" The last straw was that Mike accidentally overheard his wife talking to her friend. He could not come to his senses for several days, but the man realized that he had to stop lying to himself and finally put a stop to their relationship. "So I'm your dog on a leash." He was angry. "You got yourself a bag of money, but we'll see about that. You're gonna walk out of here with nothing." The husband waited a few days for the right moment. On Saturday, when he was home, Cindy made a real scene. She lashed out at the cleaning lady and accused her of having a woman scout her on the carpet. "What are you, hands off?" screaming at the top of her lungs. "Mistress, you poured it on that expensive carpet on purpose. Now he can just be thrown out on the street." "I didn't do anything." The girl sobbed. "Michael, it wasn't me." "Get out of here." Cindy pointed to the door. "I don't want to see you here anymore." "Helen, stay," ordered the master. "You're not going anywhere, please. Keep cleaning." Everyone froze in bewilderment. The servants looked at the mistress and the master. "Mike, what does that mean?" Cindy said at last, "Do you want to keep her after this?" "Yes," the man answered briefly. "I trust her completely. I am sure that Helen is not guilty of anything." "So you're accusing me of lying?" she asked in astonishment. "You're not defending me, you're defending her." "I'm nothing to you at all." "Cindy, enough. What's all this drama for?" The husband looked sternly at his wife. "These people have been working here longer than I've known you." "Well, you know," turned Cindy indicatively. "Then I'll go away." The girl defiantly took out her things and got into a cab. Mike, what did she expect? He didn't run after her. "Well, that's all right. You came crawling back to me on your knees." "She was just mad at you, you stupid idiot. You should be kissing my hands for wasting my attention on you." But not in a day, not in 2 days, not in a week. Mike Cindy never called. Finally, the girl couldn't take it anymore. She lost everything in her wealth and her job. In essence, Cindy was left with nothing. "Mike, I think you want to explain yourself." She dialed her husband's number. "I'm ready to hear you out." "No," Cindy calmly answered the voice in the receiver. "I think we've told each other everything. Soon you will receive divorce papers as a divorce." In shock, pronounced the girl. "You're going to divorce me for such a small thing." "Cindy, I'm sorry, I was just blind. So I didn't notice how I got into your net," sighed Mike. "They say you can't walk into the same river twice, but I did. It was the same with my second wife. You're no different from her. My only regret is that I lost a good man because of you. I don't think I'll ever meet anyone like Betty again. How did you get back? Alex looked surprised. Did that millionaire dump her or what? I don't know, Alex. She doesn't say anything about it, replied the man. But what's with the impatience? Asked the guy. Is she expecting a baby? Alex, Betty is an invalid. Finally said Jack. She's in a wheelchair. What did her husband do to her? Alex clenched his fists. What happened to her? I'm telling you, nobody knows. Betty doesn't talk about it. The man calmed the guy down. Okay, then I'll go to her now. Alex got up from the table and headed for the exit. Alex, it's already nighttime, especially outside. It's so cold. March is not warm this year. Jack was trying to keep the boy away. I can't stand another night, Alex calmly replied and went out into the yard. In about 10 minutes, he was already near a familiar house. There were no lights in the house, so Betty was already asleep. Alex jumped over the fence and went to the shed. I'll stay here until morning, and then I'll go to her, he said to himself. Alex didn't know what he really wanted. In his heart, he still loved Betty. It was very important for him to hear an answer from her. The guy thought that if there was a real reason in it, he could justify and forgive Betty, and they would be together again. But the pain of betrayal provoked him to revenge. There was a voice in his head that suggested that Betty speak up and get out of her life for good, especially if the girl became an invalid. It would only hurt her more because no one else would want her. If she hadn't betrayed me, Alex whispered, I would never have left her. And I don't care if she's walking or lying down. Betty, I still love you. The boy sobbed. I don't want anyone but you. It must have been about 300 am when Betty woke up. She felt as if someone was calling her. The girl sat up in bed. She froze with shock. There was a light on in her barn. Oh my God. Pale. With her lips, she said. Some thieves had broken in. At first, she crawled under the blanket, but then she decided to look. Maybe I forgot to turn off the light last night. She sighed with relief. I'm scaring myself. The girl did not put on warm clothes. She got into her stroller and slowly drove to the front door. Betty walked down the porch, grabbing the railing. There was paved asphalt to the barn, so she got there easily. Who's there? Shouted the girl, stopping her stroller near the barn. What do you want? At first, there was silence. But then Betty heard distinct footsteps. Her heart pounded frantically. The door opened from the barn and a man stepped out. Betty, it's me. Don't be afraid, said the familiar voice of Alex. Alex, she said in astonishment. But what are you doing here? I came to talk to you, the guy answered briefly and looked at Betty's wheelchair with horror. All right then, pass with pale lips, she pronounced. Let's go into the house. It's cold in here. The guy watched the girl ride the wheelchair and his heart clenched. Betty, what happened to you? Couldn't take it when they came in. I got back what I deserved. Tried to smile at the girl, or was I just unlucky? I don't know, only after you left me. I just didn't feel like living. I dumped you, the Betty guy said in astonishment. You're making fun of me. Alex, I don't know what you're talking about. In shock, she looked at him. 6 months later, you wrote me a letter that it's over between us. You met some nurse in prison and you were happy with her. What nurse? What is this nonsense? Alex got angry. I've never had anyone but you. I was the one who got a letter from you saying you'd left me and were going to marry me. Alex, why couldn't you believe what he said? Yes, I couldn't imagine my life without you. I don't know how I survived our breakup. Betty, why all the lies? I don't believe you. Fuck the guy. Okay, replied the girl calmly and went somewhere. 5 minutes later, she came back. She had a letter in her hand. Look at this. She looked him in the eye. It's your letter and your handwriting. Betty, but I never wrote it. The boy was stunned. I don't understand anything. He quickly realized and pulled out his letter. They both read it. Jesus. I think I understand now who could have done it. Alex said in horror. Gilbert did it. Who is it? Betty asked in surprise. What did he do? Betty, we had this authority figure in prison. This guy started it. He disliked me from the start. They beat me half to death a few times in the beginning. And they didn't slit my wrists. But then they warned him. and he got off my back, as I thought at the time. But now I see that Gilbert just chose a different tactic. They stole your letters and mine and forged the handwriting. Spock did it. My God, I knew he was a handwriting forger. How did I fall for that trick? Alex, I don't even know what to say to you. Betty answered through her tears. After our breakup, when I came to my senses, I met a rich man. I wanted to forget everything and opened my heart to a new life. He took me from there, and for almost 6 months, we lived normally. I wasn't really attracted to his wealth and money, but I decided to try my luck then. But a month later, we had an accident. Mike miraculously remained with small scratches, and I became an invalid. After another 3 months, he began to hint that I was a burden to him, and he wanted a normal personal life.